He was a global titan worth $40 billion, but when he collapsed on a cold sidewalk, the rich spat on him, and the powerful kicked him aside. He was just another piece of trash, until she arrived, an overworked waitress, drowning in debt, who saw a tiny secret no one else did. This is the incredible story of how one small act of kindness and one sentence in a foreign language saved a billionaire's life, destroyed the fortunes of the cruel, and turned a $20,000 cash test into a $2 billion foundation. The man who called himself Mr. Kaito Tanaka was, by any measurable standard, one of the most powerful men in the world. His name, whispered in the boardrooms of Tokyo, London, and New York, was synonymous with a certain kind of ruthless, forward-thinking capitalism. Tanaka Industries was a colossus, its tentacles wrapped around global logistics, robotics, and high-end real estate. His personal fortune was a dragon's hoard, so vast that the fluctuations of entire countries were less significant than his quarterly dividend reports. But the Kaito Tanaka, who sat on the 90th floor penthouse of his New York flagship building, the Tanaka Tower on Park Avenue, was a man hollowed out by his own success. He was 68, a widower, and profoundly, terrifyingly alone. His children were executives, shadows of his own ambition, who saw him more as a board chairman than a father. He had a ritual. Once a month, in whatever city he found himself, he would shed his $20,000 bespoke suits. He would lock away his Patek Philippe watch. He would put on the clothes of a man who had nothing. Sometimes it was the faded janitorial uniform of a company he'd bought and dissolved 20 years prior. Sometimes, like today, it was a simple, worn-out suit, bought from a thrift store, the kind a man might wear to a job interview he desperately needed. He did this not for pleasure, but for perspective. He called them his walks of invisibility. He found that when he was Kaito Tanaka, the billionaire, he was surrounded by a suffocating fog of pleasantries, of false smiles and open doors. He was a concept, not a person. But as Ken, the worn-out man on the street, he was something else entirely. Invisible. Or worse, an object of contempt. This particular Monday in October was different. He was preparing to sign the single largest philanthropic donation of his life, a $2 billion urban renewal project. But a question gnawed at him. He was giving this money to a city of ghosts, a city of people who, he suspected, had lost the very core of their humanity. He needed to know. He needed to walk among them, one last time, to see if the soul of this city was worth saving. He put on the ill-fitting, polyester blend suit. It smelled faintly of mothballs. He slipped a small, almost unnoticeable lapel pin onto the jacket. It was not a brand. It was a simple, 9-petaled chrysanthemum, a personal emblem, a nod to his family's origins. He took the private elevator down to the garage, bypassed the waiting Rolls-Royce, and walked out the service exit into the bustling, indifferent canyon of Midtown Manhattan. For hours he walked. He watched a businessman, one Richard Sterling, scream at a barista for putting whole milk instead of oat milk in his latte. He watched two impeccably dressed women, Clarissa and Beatrice Vanderbilt Smythe, laugh as their car service splashed a puddle of grey sludge onto a mother pushing a stroller. He felt a coldness creep into his heart. The city was exactly as he feared, a beautiful, glittering machine with no heart. He felt a weariness, not just in his bones, but in his spirit. And then, something else. A sudden, sharp dizziness. He stumbled, catching himself on a lamppost. The world tilted. A crushing pressure like a steel band tightened around his chest. He gasped, his vision blurring at the edges. Not here, he thought. Not like this. He knew the signs. A TIA. A transient ischemic attack. A warning shot from his own body. He fumbled in the pocket of his cheap trousers for the small vial of nitroglycerin pills his doctor insisted he carry. His fingers, suddenly numb and clumsy, couldn't grasp the small cap. The vial slipped from his hand, bounced once on the pavement, and rolled directly into a storm drain. A new, cold terror seized him. He leaned against the polished granite wall of a bank, sliding down into a sitting position. His tie was askew. His face, pale and sweating, must have looked terrifying. He was Kaito Tanaka. He was worth $40 billion, and he was dying on a sidewalk, invisible. The world had compressed to a pinprick of blurry light and noise. Kaito Tanaka, the man who commanded audiences with presidents, was now just a lump of discarded humanity on the corner of 5th Avenue and 59th Street, right by the Grand Plaza. He tried to speak, to ask for help. The words came out as a garbled slur. "Help! Please! Hospital!" A man in a charcoal Armani suit, Richard Sterling, was walking briskly out of the L'Orangerie restaurant after a 3-martini lunch. He was preoccupied, checking his stock ticker. He saw the slumped figure and automatically veered away. Disgusting, Sterling thought, a reflex of his environment. Another drunk. Can't they clean this area up? It's bad for business. He didn't just ignore Tanaka. He actively showed his disdain, pulling the lapel of his jacket over his nose as if to ward off a smell. Tanaka watched him through a watery haze. He recognized him. This was the man from the coffee shop. This was also, ironically, the CEO of a hedge fund that was desperately petitioning Tanaka Industries for a partnership. Tanaka tried to lift a hand. "Mr. Sterling, it's me." Sterling just saw a grimy hand reaching out and flinched. "Get away from me," he snapped, his voice sharp and cold, before striding off toward his office, already forgetting the encounter. Minutes later, the Vanderbilt Smythe sisters, Clarissa and Beatrice, exited a nearby boutique, their arms laden with designer bags. They were laughing about a mutual friend's disastrous charity ball. "Oh, look," Beatrice whispered, nudging her sister, her voice dripping with venomous amusement. "He's completely given up." Right in front of Chanel. The audacity. Clarissa raised her phone, not to call for help, but to take a picture. For the group chat. Only on 5th. It's just too perfect. He's ruining the whole aesthetic. "He's probably faking," Beatrice added, pulling her mink stole tighter. "They do that. They fake seizures for sympathy money." Tanaka's vision was darkening. The pain in his chest was ebbing, replaced by a terrifying, cold numbness. He could hear them. He could hear their laughter. It was the sound of beautiful, empty bells. The final and perhaps cruelest blow came from Frank. Frank was the doorman at L'Orangerie, a bastion of old-world snobbery. He was a man who built his entire identity on the pristine nature of his sidewalk. He wore a heavy wool coat with gold epaulets, and he ruled his 50-foot patch of concrete like a tyrant. He had been watching Tanaka with growing irritation. This thing was a blight. A stain. It was bad for the restaurant's image. Frank marched over. He didn't bend down. He didn't ask if the man was okay. He nudged Tanaka's shoulder with the toe of his polished black boot. "All right, pal, move it along," Frank barked. "You can't sleep here. This is private property. Go on, get up." Tanaka groaned, trying to push himself up. He was too weak. The world was spinning. "Sick," he managed, the one word pushing past his lips. Frank sneered. "Sick? Yeah, I'll bet. Sick of being sober. I'm not going to tell you again. Get up." With a grunt of effort, Frank grabbed the collar of Tanaka's cheap jacket. The fabric ripped with a tearing sound. He half-dragged, half-pushed Tanaka away from the gleaming facade, shoving him toward a small, refuse-filled alcove between the restaurant and the next building. "Stay here and don't let me see you again," Frank spat, wiping his hands on his trousers as if he'd just handled raw sewage. Tanaka collapsed onto the damp cardboard. The shoving had worsened his condition. The world was going grey. He had built empires. He had reshaped skylines. And he was going to die in an alley, pushed there by a man in a silly costume. He thought of his late wife, Akiko. He thought of the garden in their Kyoto home. He closed his eyes. The roar of the city, the laughter, the insults. It all faded into a dull, distant hum. He was alone. 3 blocks away and a world apart from the glittering misery of Fifth Avenue, Sarah Jenkins was wiping down an espresso machine. The daily grind was the antithesis of l'orangerie. It was a narrow, perpetually steamy cafe with flickering fluorescent lights, mismatched chairs, and the persistent smell of burnt coffee and cinnamon. It was a place for construction workers, tired students, and people who had to punch a clock. Sarah, at 27, felt like she'd been punching a clock her entire life. She was a woman of profound, and currently useless, intelligence. She had graduated summa cum laude, with a degree in East Asian studies and a minor in linguistics. Her passion was the nuanced, beautiful, and complex culture of Japan. She had spent a year abroad in Kyoto, living with a host family, and had fallen in love with the language, the art, and the philosophy of kintsugi, the art of repairing broken pottery with gold, making it more beautiful because it had been broken. That philosophy felt like a cruel joke now. Her own life felt shattered, with no gold in sight. Her father, a carpenter, had fallen ill 2 years ago. A rare neurological disorder. The insurance barely made a dent. Sarah, the promising academic, the future cultural liaison, had dropped everything. She put her PhD on hold, moved back into her tiny childhood apartment, and took 2 jobs to keep the debt collectors from her parents' door. By day, she was a low-level data entry clerk in a faceless corporate building. By night, and on weekends, she was a barista at the daily grind. She was exhausted. Her body ached from being on her feet for 12 hours. Her mind ached from the sheer, mind-numbing repetition of it all. Large drip, light and sweet. Extra hot latte, skim. You call this a bagel? She looked at the clock. 3:30 p.m. Her shift was over. Her manager, a perpetually stressed man named Sal, grunted at her. Don't forget, you're opening tomorrow, 5 a.m. Don't be late. Got it, Sal. She untied her stained brown apron, hung it on a hook, and grabbed her thin coat. Her pay for the day, tips included, was $84. Her father's medication cost $200 a week. The math was relentless. She stepped out of the cafe, pulling her coat tight. The wind on 3rd Avenue was biting. She hated this city. She hated the noise, the grime, the feeling of being a tiny, insignificant cog in a machine that would grind her to dust and not even notice. She began her walk to the subway, a 15-block trek she made every day. She kept her head down, a habit of self-preservation. But as she passed the alleyway near the corner of 58th and 3rd, a block away from the world of Frank and Richard Sterling, she saw something. It was a pair of feet. Man's shoes, old and scuffed, but not the destroyed sneakers of the regulars she usually saw. These were leather shoes, once good, now neglected. Her eyes travelled up. A man in a ripped suit slumped against the brickwork. He was pale. Too pale. His eyes were closed, and his breathing was shallow and ragged. Sarah stopped. Her first instinct, born of pure New York cynicism, was to keep walking. Don't get involved. He's drunk. He's high. It's not your problem. She took 2 more steps. Kintsugi. The thought came, unbidden. The world breaks everyone. The beauty is in the mending. She sighed, her breath a white cloud in the cold air. Damn it! She turned back. Sarah approached the man cautiously. Sir? Sir, are you okay? There was no response, just a low, almost imperceptible moan. She knelt, the cold of the pavement seeping through her jeans. The smell of garbage in the alley was strong, but the man himself, he didn't smell of alcohol. He smelled of mothballs and faint, expensive cologne, long faded. Sir, can you hear me? She gently shook his shoulder. His eyelids fluttered. Kaito Tanaka's consciousness was a flickering candle in a storm. He was on the edge of a full-blown stroke, his body shutting down. He saw a shape, a blur of a person, and his fear spiked. Was it the man who had pushed him? "No, please," he whispered. The words were thick, his accent heavy, but not with a language she recognized. It was the sound of a man's tongue betraying him. "I'm not going to hurt you," Sarah said softly, her barista voice replaced by something calmer, more assured. "You look sick. I'm going to call an ambulance." She pulled out her cracked smartphone. The battery was at 14%. Come on. As she dialed 911, her eyes scanned the man, looking for identification, anything that could help. He was disheveled, his suit ripped at the collar where Frank had grabbed him. He looked like 1,000 other forgotten men. But Sarah had spent years training her eyes to see details others missed. It was a skill honed by studying ancient Japanese art, by identifying the subtle brush strokes that defined a master. She saw his hands. They were trembling, yes, and dirty from his fall. But they were not the hands of a man who had lived a life of manual labor or destitution. The nails were clean, perfectly manicured. And then she saw it. On the lapel of his cheap, torn jacket. A small metal pin. It was tarnished with street grime. She reached out and, with her thumb, wiped the dirt away. It was a chrysanthemum. Not just any chrysanthemum. A 16-petaled kiku, the imperial seal of Japan. No, wait. This one was different. It was stylized. A 9-petaled, abstract design. She had seen it before, in a textbook. It was a kamen, a family crest. A very old, very prominent one. Her blood went cold. This was not a random symbol. At that moment, the man's eyes opened, focusing on her for a split second. They were dark, terrified, and familiar. She had seen eyes like that in Kyoto, in the faces of the elderly, a particular kind of deep, ancestral knowing. He muttered something, a single word repeated like a prayer. It was slurred, broken by his medical distress, but she caught it. It was not English. It was a word from his native tongue. He was asking for water. Sarah hung up the 911 call. They would be too long. She looked at him, truly saw him. The manicured hands, the kemen, the language. This was not a drunk. This was a man in deep, specific trouble. She made a decision. She ran the 20 feet back to the daily grind, ignoring Sal's shout as she burst back through the door. She grabbed a bottle of water from the fridge and a clean towel from the back. "I'm docking your pay for that water," Sal yelled. Sarah ignored him, running back to the alley. She knelt again. "Sir, I have water." She opened it and held it to his lips. He sipped, weakly, coughing. His eyes focused on her. He was terrified. He was in a foreign land. His body was failing, and he was being treated like an animal. He looked at her, a strange blonde woman, and his face crumpled in despair. Sarah looked at his face, at the pain, at the terror. She saw the man from Kyoto. She saw the old masters in her textbooks. She saw the broken pottery. She put the water down. She took the clean, damp towel and gently, respectfully, wiped the grime from his face. And then she did the one thing that would change everything. She bowed her head, not a deep bow, but a slight, respectful inclination from the neck. She looked him in the eye, and in a clear, perfect, and steady voice, she spoke to him. Not in English. She offered him a formal, polite greeting in his own Japanese language. She asked him if he was all right, using the most respectful honorifics her studies had taught her. The effect was instantaneous. It was as if an electric current had passed through Kaito Tanaka. His hazy, pain-filled eyes snapped wide open. The fog of the TIA, the terror, the despair, it all receded, eclipsed by a profound, earth-shattering shock. For the last 3 hours he had been a non-entity, a piece of garbage. He had been screamed at, photographed, and physically assaulted. He had resigned himself to dying alone, a forgotten footnote in a city of stone. And now, this young woman, with a kind face and worn-out clothes, was kneeling in the filth with him, and she had just spoken to him. Not at him, but to him. She had spoken the language of his childhood, of his boardroom, of his very soul. He stared at her. The world, which had been spinning and grey, suddenly came into sharp, brilliant focus. He saw her clearly, the exhaustion in her eyes, the chipped nail polish, the genuine, deep concern in her expression. You speak, he managed, the words still thick, but this time in his own language. Yes, Sarah replied, still in Japanese, her voice gentle. You are safe. I have called for help. You are having a medical emergency. Can you tell me your name? Tears welled in Kaito's eyes, hot and sudden. It wasn't just the language, it was the respect. In a world that had shown him nothing but contempt, this single act of human decency, of seeing him, really seeing him, was more powerful than any medicine. It anchored him. It pulled him back from the edge. He tried to answer. My name is Tanaka. Mr. Tanaka, Sarah said, nodding. My name is Sarah. Help is coming. Just breathe. You are not alone. She was still holding the towel. She saw a cut on his hand where he had fallen. She gently wrapped it. It was at this exact moment that a new set of voices interrupted their fragile sanctuary. Oh, for God's sake, Beatrice, look! The little coffee shop girl is playing nursemaid to the bum. Sarah's head snapped up. Richard Sterling, the hedge fund manager, was standing at the mouth of the alley. With him were Clarissa and Beatrice Vanderbilt Smythe. They had apparently been on their way to a different engagement and had circled the block. They were pointing, their faces masks of cruel amusement. What is she doing? Clarissa hissed, loud enough for Sarah to hear. Is she bowing to it? How bizarre. She probably thinks he's one of those hidden mystic types, Sterling added, with a booming, false laugh. Sweetheart, he called out to Sarah, you're wasting your time. He's not going to give you magic beans. He's just going to give you hepatitis. Sarah, who just moments before was a burned-out, defeated barista, felt a sudden, white-hot surge of protective rage. She stood up, placing herself between the laughing socialites and the slumped Mr. Tanaka. He's sick, you vultures, she spat, her voice shaking but strong. He's a human being. He needs help. What is wrong with you? Richard Sterling's smile vanished, replaced by a cold sneer. What's wrong with me? What's wrong with you, sweetheart? Wallowing in the filth with that. You're as bad as he is. You're both just trash, polluting the view. Beatrice chimed in. She probably is trash. Look at her coat. Probably from a thrift store, just like his. The cruelty was so casual, so profound, it stole Sarah's breath. But before she could reply, another sound joined the cacophony, the sound of a quiet, powerful engine. A black Bentley, sleek and silent as a shark, pulled to a sudden stop in the middle of the road, causing taxis to blare their horns. The back door flew open. A man in an immaculate, razor-sharp suit, Mr. Harrison, Kaito Tanaka's chief of staff, leapt out, his face pale with panic. Mr. Tanaka! Sir! Harrison yelled, spotting his boss in the alley. He had been tracking Tanaka via a GPS chip hidden in the cheap suit, a security measure Tanaka hated but had been forced to accept. When the signal stopped moving for 30 minutes, Harrison had feared the worst. Harrison and two security men sprinted into the alley, pushing past the stunned trio of Sterling and the sisters. Sir, are you all right? We're getting you to the hospital, Harrison said, his voice a frantic mix of English and Japanese. He and the security guard gently, expertly, lifted Mr. Tanaka to his feet. And then, the twist. Kaito Tanaka, bolstered by the adrenaline, the arrival of his team, and Sarah's kindness, stood. He was weak. He was leaning heavily on Harrison, but his eyes were no longer dull. They were burning. He looked at Sarah, and for a second, all the power he possessed was visible. He gave her a short, deep, and profoundly respectful bow. "You saved my life," he said in Japanese. Then he turned. He looked at the three stunned, silent figures at the mouth of the alley. Richard Sterling's face had gone from smug to ashen. His jaw was slack. He knew that car. He knew that face. He'd seen it in the Wall Street Journal just this morning. He was looking at the Kaito Tanaka, the man he'd dismissed as it. The man who held his entire company's future in the palm of his hand. Tanaka's gaze locked onto Sterling. He lifted a trembling finger and pointed. His voice was no longer slurred. It was quiet, raspy, and carried the weight of an empire. He spoke in perfect, unaccented English. "Mr. Harrison," Tanaka said. "Yes, sir?" "The meeting, 10 o'clock tomorrow, with this man." He gestured to Sterling. "Yes, sir." "The Sterling Fund proposal," Harrison replied, his face a mask of professional calm, though he clearly understood what was happening. "Cancel it," Tanaka said. Sterling let out a small, strangled sound. Mr. Tanaka, I didn't—" Tanaka's eyes were like chips of ice. "You saw a man in need, and you laughed." He turned his gaze to the Vanderbilt Smythe sisters, who looked as if they'd seen a ghost. You took a picture." He turned his gaze back to Richard Sterling. "My $2 billion renewal project. Your fund was a potential partner." "Was," Harrison echoed, his voice devoid of emotion. "Mr. Sterling," Kaito Tanaka said, as his team guided him toward the Bentley, "you are not just a bad businessman. You are a bad person. And I will never do business with bad people. You are ruined." Richard Sterling's smartphone, the one he'd used to check his stocks, slipped from his numb fingers and shattered on the pavement. Tanaka got into the car, but before Harrison closed the door, he looked back at Sarah, who was standing frozen, holding the dirty towel. "You," Tanaka called out. "Waitress. What is your name?" "Sarah. Sarah Jenkins, sir." He nodded, a look of profound, unreadable intensity on his face. "Sarah Jenkins. We are not finished." The door of the Bentley closed with a silent, expensive thud. The car pulled into traffic and vanished, leaving Sarah alone in the alley with three people whose lives had just been irrevocably destroyed. The next 24 hours were a blur for Sarah. She gave a statement to the paramedics who finally arrived, went home to her tiny apartment, and fell into a fitful sleep. She woke up convinced the entire event had been a bizarre, stress-induced hallucination. A Japanese billionaire? A public takedown? A Bentley in a garbage-filled alley? It was impossible. She got up at 4 a.m., put on her uniform, and went to open the Daily Grind. The world was as it had been. The coffee was bitter, the customers were curt, and the math of her life still didn't add up. Around 11 a.m., during the post-morning rush lull, the bell on the cafe door jingled. Sarah, wiping down the counter, didn't look up. "Be with you in a second." "Ms. Sarah Jenkins." The voice was crisp, polite, and deeply out of place. She looked up. It was the man from the Bentley. Mr. Harrison. He was wearing another perfect suit, this one a light grey. He looked as out of place in the Daily Grind as a diamond in a dustbin. Sal, her manager, was staring from the back, his mouth open. Yes. That's me," Sarah said, her heart hammering. Mr. Harrison smiled, though it didn't quite reach his eyes. "Mr. Tanaka is recovering well. He is at his home, and the doctors say he will make a full recovery. He is extremely grateful." "Oh, thank God," Sarah said, a wave of genuine relief washing over her. "I was so worried. I'm glad he's okay. That's all." Harrison studied her for a long moment. "Mr. Tanaka is a man who believes in reciprocity. He has sent this as a small token of his gratitude for your assistance." He placed a thick, cream-colored envelope on the counter. It was heavy. Sarah looked at it, then back at him. A token? A thank you gift, Harrison said. Sarah, guided by an instinct she didn't know she possessed, slid the envelope back across the counter. I can't accept that, she said quietly. Harrison's eyebrow rose, a flicker of genuine surprise on his face. I assure you, Miss Jenkins, it is a significant sum. It could be quite helpful. He glanced around the grimy cafe, a subtle but clear indication that he knew she needed it. I didn't help him for money, Sarah said, her voice finding a new strength. I helped him because he was sick, because he was a person, because no one else would. She felt a flush of anger. Does Mr. Tanaka think I'm like them? That I only do things if there's a profit? No, Harrison said. His smile, this time, was real. It transformed his face, making him look less like an executive and more like a person. He was hoping you would say that. He retrieved the envelope and, from his breast pocket, produced a different one. A simple, white business envelope. This, he said, was a test. The envelope contains $20,000 in cash. Had you taken it, I was instructed to thank you and leave. Mr. Tanaka would have paid his debt, and we would never have spoken again. Sarah felt faint. $20,000. That was 6 months of her father's care. Her hand trembled. But since you refused, Harrison continued, his voice warming, I am instructed to give you this instead. He handed her the second envelope. Inside was not money, but a single, heavy stock business card. It was embossed with the 9-petaled chrysanthemum. Below it, a handwritten address, the penthouse of the Tanaka Tower, and a time, 4:00 p.m. Today. Mr. Tanaka has formally requested a meeting with you, Ms. Jenkins, Harrison said. He doesn't want to buy your kindness. He wants to understand it. And he wants to talk about your future. My future? You are, if I may say so, spectacularly overqualified for this position. He gestured at the espresso machine. Mr. Tanaka knows this. He had me run a background check on you last night. You ran a check on me? We are a $40 billion corporation, Miss Jenkins. We don't like surprises. Your linguistic skills, your academic record, your family situation, we are aware of it all. Mr. Tanaka was particularly moved by your family's story. Harrison straightened his tie. A car will be waiting for you outside at 3:45 p.m. I strongly suggest you be in it. He turned and walked out of the cafe. Sal rushed over. Who was that? What did he want? Are you in trouble? Sarah looked down at the simple, powerful card in her hand. Sal, she said, her voice clear. I quit. At 3:45 p.m., the black Bentley, silent and heavy as a block of polished obsidian, slid to a stop outside her worn-down apartment building. The doorman, a man Sarah had only ever shared tired nods with, stared, his broom frozen in his hand, as a driver in a black suit emerged to open the door for her. Sarah Jenkins stepped out, feeling like a fraud. She was wearing her one good outfit, a simple black sheath dress and a slightly too large blazer she'd bought at a thrift store for her college graduation 2 years ago. She had spent an hour trying to fix the chipped polish on her nails. She had failed. The drive was silent, a cocoon of rich leather and double-paned glass that erased the city's frantic noise. They left her world of sirens, shouting and street-level grime, and began to ascend. The Tanaka Tower was not a building, it was a statement. It was a spear of glass and steel that pierced the clouds, a monument to a power so vast it was almost abstract. The lobby was a marble canyon, silent save for the hushed tapping of her own worn-out heels. Mr. Harrison was waiting for her. He was all polite smiles, but his eyes were appraising. He guided her not to a bank of public elevators, but to a single unmarked silver door. A private elevator. The ride up was unnervingly fast and completely silent. Her ears popped. It felt less like an ascent and more like a decompression, as if she were being separated from the very atmosphere the rest of the world breathed. The doors opened. There was no hallway, no foyer. The elevator doors opened directly into the penthouse, and Sarah forgot to breathe. The space was a kingdom in the sky. It wasn't a room. It was the entire 90th floor. The walls were not walls, but floor-to-ceiling panes of glass, revealing a 360-degree, godlike panorama of New York City. The city she knew, a messy, loud, intimate tangle of streets, was gone. In its place was a silent, glittering map. A toy set. The sun was beginning to dip, and the city was bathed in a brilliant, cold, golden light. Far below, she could just make out the dark green rectangle of Central Park. She could see the glittering thread of the East River. She could see, if she squinted, the exact corner where she had found him. A tiny, insignificant intersection, so small it didn't seem real. The penthouse was almost empty. A single, ancient-looking bonsai tree, its branches twisted into a work of art, sat on a low platform. A few priceless-looking scrolls hung on the only solid walls. And by the window, looking down at his city, was Kaito Tanaka. He was not the man from the alley. He was not the pale, trembling, broken creature she had held. He was not even the man from the news reports. He was wearing a simple, elegant yukata of dark, storm-grey silk. His posture was perfect. He looked serene, ancient, and absolutely terrifyingly powerful. He turned, and his face was no longer pale or fear-stricken. His eyes were clear, sharp, and kind. "Miss Jenkins, Sarah, please come in." His English was perfect, the accent a formal musical cadence. "Mr. Tanaka," Sarah said, her voice a small, reedy thing. I'm so glad to see you're well." "I am well because of you," he said, gesturing to a low table set with 2 cushions on the floor. "Please, sit." Sarah sat, awkwardly tucking her legs. A woman in a traditional kimono, who seemed to have materialized from the air, glided in. She performed a silent, graceful tea ceremony, placing a simple, rough-hewn ceramic bowl in front of each of them. The woman bowed and vanished. Sarah looked at her bowl. It was beautiful, but imperfect. A stark, jagged line of what looked like gold lacquer ran down one side, holding 2 pieces of the bowl together. "The doctors at the hospital," Tanaka began, his voice quiet but filling the vast room, "were very clear. I was not just unwell. I was in the final, critical minutes of a transient ischemic attack. You found me, Miss Jenkins, at the precise moment it was cascading into a full, catastrophic stroke. Another 10 minutes, perhaps 5, and the man you see before you would be gone. In his place, a vegetable, or a corpse." He sipped his tea. "You did not just save my dignity. You saved my life." I just did what anyone would have done," Sarah stammered, the line feeling hollow and foolish as soon as she said it. Tanaka's eyes hardened, just slightly. "No," he said, his voice cutting through the air. "That is the precise, devastating point. I sat on that cold pavement for nearly 40 minutes. Hundreds of people passed me. Anyone didn't do what you did." He leaned forward, and the Titan was back. "Do you know who anyone is, Sarah? Anyone is Richard Sterling, a man who has begged my company for $1 million partnership for 6 months. He looked me in the eye, saw I was dying, and told me to get away from him. Anyone is Clarissa and Beatrice Vanderbilt Smythe, women who sit on the board of the Metropolitan Museum, who looked at a dying man and took a photograph for their group chat." He shook his head, a look of profound, cold disappointment on his face. "And anyone is Frank, the doorman, a man paid to stand guard, who saw suffering and decided it was inconvenient. He kicked me, Miss Jenkins. He dragged me into the filth. That's horrible, Sarah whispered, stunned by the venom in his voice. It is the truth, Tanaka said. I have been a wealthy man for a very long time. Wealth is a fortress. It is meant to protect you, but it is also a prison. It isolates you. You become surrounded by mirrors, by people who only reflect what you want to see. My wife, Akiko, she was the last person who saw me, and not the Tanaka name. She has been gone for 10 years. He sighed. I do those walks of invisibility to remind myself what the real world is like, to see if the world my wife loved still exists. For a decade, I have found nothing. Just reflections of their own greed, or their fear, or their contempt. I had begun to believe that was all that was left. I was on that street yesterday, he said, his voice dropping, to test a theory. I was planning to donate $2 billion to this city's charitable foundations, a legacy project, but I feared I was planting a garden in dead soil. I believed the city had no heart left to save. And, Sarah asked, her own heart pounding. And I was right, Tanaka said, a sad smile touching his lips. The city is a machine. Sterling, the sisters, the doorman. They are the rule. They are the gears. I saw them clearly. And they, he added, with a new, sharp edge, have seen me. Or rather, they have seen the consequences of their actions. What? What do you mean? Mr. Sterling's meeting was indeed cancelled, Tanaka said, sipping his tea as if discussing the weather. Along with every line of credit he has with any bank I have an interest in. His fund is in receivership. He flew to London this morning, but my partners there were forewarned. He is a pariah. A man who kicks a dying beggar is not a man one can trust with a portfolio. He continued. The Vanderbilt Smythe sisters, their photograph became evidence. Their family's old money is built entirely on reputation. I made a single phone call to the head of the museum board, a man whose wing I personally endowed. I described what I saw. I believe the words disgusted and inhumane were used. They are no longer welcome. They have been shunned. Sarah felt a cold chill. This was a power she couldn't comprehend. It was justice, but it was swift and terrible. And Frank, the doorman? She asked. He was the most honest, Tanaka said. He was not greedy, just cruel. He was fired, of course. He will find that the service industry is no longer open to him. He will now know what it truly means to be invisible. He set his tea bowl down. He saw the conflicted look on Sarah's face. This is not vengeance, Sarah, he said gently. It is balance. But it is not the point. They are the old world. I am interested in the new one. He picked up his tea bowl, the one with the golden seam. Do you know what this is? Sarah nodded. It's kintsugi, she said, her academic voice returning, a small island of confidence. The art of repairing broken pottery with gold lacquer. The philosophy that an object is more beautiful for having been broken. Tanaka's face broke into a genuine, brilliant smile. Yes, this bowl was shattered by my grandfather in a fit of rage 500 years ago. It was worthless. But the master who repaired it, he did not hide the break. He illuminated it. He made the damage the most beautiful part of the piece. It is now the most valuable thing I own. He placed the bowl on the table between them. Yesterday, I was that broken bowl. I was shattered, worthless, and not just my body, my spirit, my faith in humanity. It was in pieces. He looked her directly in the eye, and his gaze was intense, unblinking. And then you came. You knelt in the garbage. You, with your own exhaustion, your own troubles. Oh yes, I know about them, Sarah. I know about your father. You saw me, and you did not see trash. You saw a person. You spoke to me. he said, and his voice thickened with emotion. In my own language, a single word of respect, a single gesture of kindness. In that moment, he said, you were the gold. Sarah was speechless. Tears were brimming in her eyes. I asked myself, why? Why did you do it? You didn't know who I was. There was no reward. You had nothing to gain, and perhaps much to lose. This was it. This was the real question. Sarah took a breath, the woman from the alley and the summa cum laude academic merging into one. Because I've spent my life studying, not just a language, but a philosophy, she said, her voice shaking but clear. The idea that things have a spirit, a kami, even broken things, especially broken things. She thought of her father, of his battle, of her own endless, grinding fatigue. I watch my father fight a disease that breaks him a little more each day. But he is not less. He is more. His spirit is stronger at the breaks. When I saw you, I didn't see trash. I saw a person. You were just broken, and I had a little gold to share. That's all. Tanaka stared at her for a long, silent minute. The city hummed, a million lives inaudible below them. A little gold, he repeated, savoring the phrase. No, Sarah, a mine. He stood up, walking back to the window. I told you I have a $2 billion problem. I have this poison that I must use for good. But I cannot give it to the sterlings of the world. I cannot give it to people who build more walls. I need a new architect. Someone who builds bridges. He turned to face her. I am not offering you a job, Ms. Jenkins. I am offering you a mission. I am cancelling my donations to the established foundations. They are part of the machine. Instead, I am creating a new one, the Tanaka Urban Compassion Foundation, and I want you to run it. Sarah's world tilted. What? Run it? Mr. Tanaka, I'm a barista. You were a barista, he corrected, a sharp tone in his voice. Don't ever diminish what you are. Do you think I need another grey-suited man from Wharton to run this? I have hundreds of them. They know finance. They know leverage. They know nothing of what matters. They know nothing of kintsugi. I am not hiring your resume, Miss Jenkins. I am hiring your character. I can teach you to manage a fund. I cannot teach you to have a heart. I cannot teach you to kneel in the filth. You already know how. A $2 billion foundation? She couldn't even process the number. It was a sound, not a concept. This is too much, she whispered, her hands trembling, covering her mouth. I can't. You can, he said simply. But you cannot build a new world when you are trapped by the old one. He walked over to a desk and picked up a single white envelope. As of 9:00 a.m. this morning, my family office has settled every outstanding medical and personal debt belonging to you and your parents. In full. Your father's care is now secured, permanently, with the finest specialists in the country. You are free. This was the blow she couldn't withstand. Not the job, not the money. This, the freedom, the crushing, suffocating weight she had carried for 3 years. The relentless math, the fear, the exhaustion, the slow-motion drowning. It evaporated. It was gone. Sarah didn't just cry. She sobbed, a raw, ragged, animal sound of pure, agonizing release. It was the sound of a prisoner set free. She hunched over, hiding her face, embarrassed by the raw display. Tanaka did not move. He did not patronize her. He simply waited, respectfully, giving her the dignity of her own catharsis. After a minute, she wiped her face, composing herself. She stood up, her legs wobbly, but her back straight. She was no longer the barista. She was no longer the debtor. She was just Sarah. She looked at the most powerful man she had ever met. What do I do first? Kaito Tanaka smiled. He walked her to the vast window, the city lights beginning to glitter like a sea of diamonds below them. "You tell me," he said. "You were the one on the ground. You know where the cracks are." He went back to the table, picked up the priceless kintsugi tea bowl, and placed it in her hands. "Go," he said. "Find them." 6 months later, Sarah Jenkins stood at a podium in a beautifully renovated building in the Bronx. It was the new Kyoto, New York Cultural Exchange, a place offering free language classes, community support, and medical advocacy. It was the first of a dozen projects she had greenlit. She was no longer the tired, defeated woman. She wore a sharp, confident suit. Her eyes were bright. Mr. Tanaka sat in the front row, beaming. "Kindness," Sarah said to the crowd and the assembled press, "is not a transaction. It is not something we do for a reward. It is the core of our shared humanity. It is the gold we use to mend the world." After the ceremony, she was walking to her car when she passed a homeless shelter her foundation was now funding. A line of men waited for a hot meal. One of them, his face weathered and beaten by the street, looked up. It was Frank, the doorman from l'Orangerie. He had been fired the day after the incident, blacklisted by every high-end establishment in the city. He was just another face in the crowd, invisible. He recognized Sarah. His eyes went wide with shame, and he looked away. Sarah stopped. She walked over to the man serving the food. She whispered something to him. The server nodded, and when Frank got to the front of the line, he was given an extra-large portion and a warm, clean coat. Frank looked over at Sarah, who was getting into her car. He couldn't speak. Sarah just looked at him, gave a small, polite nod, and was driven away. She didn't feel anger, or pity, or even triumph. She just saw a broken piece, and she had a lot of gold to share. Sarah Jenkins went from serving coffee to running a multi-billion-dollar foundation, all because of one small act of kindness. The world is full of people who will, like Richard Sterling, just walk by. But this story is a powerful reminder that compassion is the greatest currency we have. Recognizing the humanity in someone else, seeing the person beneath the rags, can literally change the world. You never know who you are helping, but more importantly, a true act of kindness doesn't care who they are. If this story touched your heart, please like this video and share it with someone who needs to see it. And don't forget to subscribe to our channel for more true stories that will restore your faith in humanity. Thank you for watching.